When my husband of 43 years died, my daughter took our family home and his entire $33 million fortune. Then she looked me in the eye, her own flesh and blood, and told me to find a hole to die in. You're worthless now. It was the cruelest moment of my life. But what she didn't know, what our lawyer was about to reveal in a stunning twist of fate, was the one tiny clause my brilliant husband had hidden deep within his will. A clause that was about to turn my daughter's world completely upside down and give me the ultimate revenge. Before I get into the ugly, shocking details of this family drama, I want to thank you for being here. If you're watching this from your own cozy home, give that subscribe button a click. It means the world to me. And please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. It's comforting to know I'm not alone in telling this. You truly won't believe how quickly a home, a life can be ripped away from you. My story begins in Maple Creek, Ohio, in a two-story colonial on a street lined with oak trees. For 43 years it was more than my house. It was my sanctuary, the vessel that held my life. Richard and I had built everything that mattered within those walls. I remember the day we brought our daughter Jessica home from the hospital, convinced the house felt too big for such a tiny person. Years later, it felt too small to contain her teenage energy. Every scuff on the baseboards, every faded patch of wallpaper in the dining room told a story. The scent of Richard's old books still lingered in his study, and his favorite leather armchair still held the faint imprint of his shoulders, a ghostly embrace that was both a comfort and a torture. When he passed away from a massive heart attack 2 months ago, the silence he left behind was deafening. At 71 he was gone, and at 67, I was utterly and completely adrift in a sea of memories. Jessica, my only child, swooped in with her husband, Mark. He was a sharp-suited investment banker from Cleveland with the kind of polished smile that never reached his eyes. In the thick, disorienting fog of my grief, I mistook their sudden, intense attention for love and concern. They were at the house every single day, bringing casseroles I couldn't eat and speaking in the hushed, overly patient tones one uses for the very young or the very old. "Mom, you can't possibly manage this big house alone," Jessica would say, her voice dripping with a cloying sweetness. She'd run a manicured finger along a dusty mantelpiece. "The stairs, the maintenance, and all the painful memories. It's just not healthy for you to be surrounded by it all." Then came the brochures. They arrived in glossy, cheerful stacks. Golden Meadows, Serenity Gardens, Willow Creek Senior Living. They were retirement communities, assisted living facilities, nursing homes, places for people waiting out their final chapter. They'd corner me at the kitchen table, the one where Jessica used to do her homework, and spread them out like a winning hand in a card game I didn't know I was playing. "These places are wonderful, Mom," Mark would chime in, pointing to a picture of smiling, silver-haired seniors playing shuffleboard. "You'd have people your own age. Activities. Community. No responsibilities, no worries." What they meant was no inconvenient mother to deal with, no inheritance to wait for. I was a loose end they were eager to tie up and tuck away. I tried to push back, my voice weak with unshed tears. "This house is my home," I'd plead. "I feel Richard here." But my grief made me fragile, and my arguments were brushed aside with gentle pats on the hand and sad, knowing looks. They saw a grieving, fragile old woman, lost and confused. They didn't see the wife of a man who had always been 10 steps ahead of everyone else. Richard had been a brilliant, meticulous man, especially when it came to finances and protecting his family. And I knew deep in my bones he would never have left me vulnerable. I just couldn't understand why Jessica was pushing so hard. This wasn't the girl I raised. A cold knot of dread began to form in my stomach, a feeling that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong with this picture. I tried to dismiss it as a side effect of my sorrow, but the feeling lingered, a shadow in the corner of my eye. I thought her concern was genuine, a daughter worried for her grieving mother. I couldn't have been more wrong. The truth was far more calculated and cruel than I could ever imagine. That gut feeling of mine turned into a full-blown nightmare the following Tuesday. It was a gray, drizzly morning that matched the mood inside my heart. I was in the kitchen, staring into a cold cup of coffee I had no intention of drinking, when Jessica's sleek black SUV pulled into the driveway with a crunch of tires on gravel. My heart gave a little leap of hope. Maybe she was just coming to check on me. But that hope dissolved into ice when she and Mark got out. They weren't carrying groceries or flowers. They were pulling two large, empty suitcases from the trunk. They looked like vultures circling. My own heart began to pound a nervous, frantic rhythm against my ribs. I met them at the door, my hand trembling on the knob. "Jessica? What's all this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, already dreading the answer. Jessica walked past me into the foyer, her heels clicking decisively on the hardwood floors Richard and I had spent a whole summer installing together. She didn't hug me. She didn't even offer a sad, sympathetic smile. She just stood there, her arms crossed, a general inspecting her newly conquered territory. The air crackled with a tension that was cold and sharp. "Mark got the promotion," she announced, her voice flat and devoid of any real emotion. "The big one. Vice President. We need to move back into the city immediately for the commute. We've been looking at houses, but this house is perfect for us. It's close to his new office, and it's in the best school district for the kids." I stared at her, the words swirling in my head but refusing to make sense. It was like she was speaking a foreign language. "Move in," I repeated dumbly. "But honey, this is my home. This is where I live." That's when the mask of concern she'd been wearing for weeks finally crumbled into dust. For a split second I saw the raw, naked ambition underneath. It was an expression of such cold, hard calculation that it made the breath catch in my throat. This was not my daughter. This was a stranger. "Actually, Mom," she said, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "According to Dad's will, I inherited everything. The house, the investments, all of it. Every last penny of the $33 million. The words hit me like a physical blow. The room swam. I stumbled back, my hand flying out to grab the edge of the hall table to keep from collapsing. "No," I stammered, shaking my head in disbelief. "No, that can't be right. There must be some mistake. Your father. He would never." "No mistake," Mark interrupted, stepping forward like a predator sensing weakness. He placed a thick file folder on the table with a soft thud. He opened it to show me a document that looked terrifyingly official, covered in signatures and dense legal jargon. Richard was very clear. He knew Jessica would take better care of his legacy than you ever could. "You never understood money, Eleanor. You were just the wife. Just the wife. 43 years of love, of partnership, of raising his child and building our life together. Reduced to those three dismissive, erasing words. That's when Jessica delivered the killing blow. The words that will be etched onto my soul until my dying day." She stepped closer, leaning in as if sharing a secret, her perfume thick and cloying. "We've been kind letting you stay here this long. But our kindness has run out. It's time for you to find your own place. Find a hole to die in. You're worthless now." Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent. I was too stunned to scream, too broken to fight. As they began to efficiently, brutally, pack my most personal belongings into their empty suitcases, I reached for my phone. My only thought was of my grandchildren, of hearing their voices one last time from inside this house. I dialed my grandson's number, my fingers trembling so hard I could barely press the screen. The call didn't go through. I tried again. Nothing. A recorded message said the number was unavailable. Confused and panicking, I tried my granddaughter's number. The same thing. A cold, horrifying realization washed over me like icy water. Jessica had blocked my number from her children's phones. She wasn't just kicking me out of my home. She was erasing me from their lives completely. It was a level of cruelty I didn't know was possible. As they packed my life into two small suitcases, my neighbor Brenda May watched from her window, her face a mask of horror. I had lost my husband, my home, and my daughter in one fell swoop. Or so I thought. The ride to my new home was the longest 45 minutes of my life. The silence in the SUV was a tangible thing, heavy and suffocating. I sat in the back, clutching my purse on my lap like a life raft, the unfamiliar scent of expensive leather and Jessica's perfume making me feel nauseous. Mark drove with a grim, focused efficiency, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the road. He never once glanced at me in the rearview mirror. I didn't exist. Jessica, in the passenger seat, scrolled endlessly through her phone, occasionally sighing with theatrical impatience, as if I were an inconvenient errand she couldn't wait to finish. I was a piece of garbage being taken to the dump, I watched through the tinted windows as my beautiful neighborhood, with its familiar houses and manicured lawns, disappeared behind us. We drove away from the life I knew, away from the city center, and headed toward the bleak industrial outskirts, a place I didn't even know existed. The buildings grew shabbier, the streets wider and emptier. Finally, Mark pulled into the cracked asphalt parking lot of the Crossroads Motel. A flickering neon sign with a dead O in motel cast a sickly green glow over the peeling paint and boarded-up windows of the second floor. It was the kind of place you see in crime shows, a place where hope goes to die. He unloaded my 2 suitcases and the small, precious box of photos onto the grimy sidewalk with the detached air of someone dropping off a donation at Goodwill. Jessica got out of the car but kept her distance, as if my despair were a contagious disease. She walked over and pressed a few folded bills into my trembling hand. "Here's $200, she said, her gaze fixed somewhere over my shoulder. "That should cover you for a few days while you get settled. We'll have some money transferred to your account once we sort through Dad's paperwork. Don't call us. We'll call you. Some money. From the $33 million inheritance that was rightfully mine." The sheer audacity of it left me speechless. Before I could even form a response, they were back in their car, the engine purring to life. They drove away without a backward glance, leaving me standing alone under that flickering, dying sign, the crisp $20 bills feeling like poison in my hand. The room smelled of stale cigarettes, bleach, and decades of quiet desperation. The cheap polyester bedspread had cigarette burns in it. The wallpaper was stained and peeling near the rattling air conditioning unit. I sat down on the lumpy mattress, the springs groaning in protest. This was it. This was my life now. In the span of a few hours, I had gone from a grieving but comfortable widow in a loving home to a homeless, destitute senior citizen. Discarded. Thrown away like trash by my own child. My phone buzzed, the sound jarring in the dead quiet of the room. It was my neighbor, Brenda May. "Eleanor, honey, I saw them," she said, her voice choked with tears and outrage. "I saw the suitcases. I can't believe it. That girl has a heart of stone. Please come stay with me. You can have my guest room for as long as you need." Her kindness was a tiny pinprick of light in my suffocating darkness, but I couldn't accept. The shame was a physical weight, pinning me to that disgusting bed. "Thank you, Brenda," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "You're a good friend. But I need to be alone right now. They had taken everything from me. My home, my money, my grandchildren, my dignity. I felt so alone, so completely broken. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have just given up and accepted this horrible fate? Let me know in the comments. I truly want to know what you think. I curled up on that disgusting bed, pulled the threadbare blanket over my head, and cried until I had no tears left, convinced that my life was well and truly over. But sitting there in that dingy room, a memory sparked in my mind, a tiny ember in the cold ashes of my despair. A conversation I had with Richard years ago about his will. He had been so serious, so insistent. He had looked me right in the eye and said something I'd long forgotten. That's when I realized Jessica had made a catastrophic mistake. The memory came back to me in a flash, as clear and vivid as if it had happened yesterday. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon about 5 years ago. We were in Richard's study, the soft light of his desk lamp illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He had just come back from a meeting with his lawyer, Arthur Croft, and he had a serious look on his face that always meant something important was on his mind. He sat me down in his big, worn leather chair and took my hands in his. His hands were always so warm and steady. "Ellie," he had said, his voice low and firm, "we need to talk about Jessica." I remember feeling a familiar prickle of maternal defensiveness. Jessica was his princess, but he was also the only one who saw her flaws with unblinking clarity. He continued, "I love our daughter more than words can say. You know that. But she has a streak of ruthlessness when it comes to money. A sense of entitlement that worries me deeply. It's like she sees life as a game to be won, not a journey to be lived." I remembered a time Jessica had come home from college, furious that her trust fund allowance wasn't as large as her roommates. Richard had sat her down and told her, "Your character is your currency, Jessica. And right now you're nearly bankrupt." She hadn't spoken to him for a month. "I'm updating my will," he told me that day in the study. "I'm putting certain protections in place." He squeezed my hands. I will always make sure you are taken care of, Eleanor. I will not leave you at the mercy of anyone, not even our own daughter. I promise you that. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't thoughtless. Richard Vance was the most honorable, meticulous man I knew. He would never ever leave me destitute. The document Mark had flashed in my face, with its cold, clinical dismissal of me, had to be a fake. A forgery. The realization sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated adrenaline through my exhausted body. The grief and despair that had been crushing me for hours began to recede, pushed back by a tide of cold, hard anger. My daughter had not only thrown me out, she had lied and cheated and forged legal documents to do it. She had underestimated both her father's intelligence and her mother's strength. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The motel's Wi-Fi was painfully slow, constantly dropping and reconnecting, but it was enough. I pulled out my old laptop, its battery life thankfully still decent, and searched for Arthur Croft, attorney at law, Cleveland. His distinguished, kind face appeared on the screen, a beacon in the digital gloom. His office was downtown, a 45-minute bus ride away. Hope, fragile but fierce, began to bloom in my chest. The next morning, I used a chunk of my precious $200 to buy a bus ticket. I did my best to make myself look presentable in the motel's cracked, grimy bathroom mirror, pulling on the nicest blouse I had in my suitcase and trying to tame my tear-ravaged hair. As I rode the city bus, watching the bleak landscape of my current reality give way to the towering glass and steel of downtown Cleveland, I felt a flicker of my old self returning. I wasn't just a grieving widow anymore. I wasn't a victim. I was a woman on a mission for justice, a mission to reclaim my life from the daughter who had tried to steal it. I walked into Arthur Croft's plush office, the scent of leather, old books, and success a comforting contrast to the motel's stench of despair. The young secretary at the front desk looked at my simple clothes and tired face with an expression of polite pity, her eyes flicking over me as if I were a charity case who had wandered into the wrong building. "May I help you?" she asked, her voice professionally smooth. "I'm here to see Mr. Croft," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "My name is Eleanor Vance." She typed my name into her computer, her brow furrowing slightly. "I'm sorry, he's with a client. Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said, my heart sinking. "But it's urgent. It's about my late husband, Richard Vance." Her eyes widened in recognition. She picked up her phone and spoke in a low, hushed voice. A moment later, the door to the inner office swung open. Arthur Croft stood there, older now, his hair completely white, but his eyes behind his wire-rimmed glasses were as kind and sharp as ever. And his expression wasn't one of pity. It was pure, unadulterated shock. "Eleanor!" he exclaimed, rushing forward and taking my hands. "My dear, what on earth are you doing here? I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Jessica told me you were on an extended cruise in Europe." The lie was so audacious, so breathtakingly bold, that for a moment I couldn't even speak. A cruise in Europe? While I was rotting away in a $40 a night motel, surviving on vending machine coffee and stale crackers, the anger that had been simmering inside me began to boil over, hot and cleansing. It burned away the last vestiges of my shock and grief, leaving behind a core of pure, unyielding resolve. Arthur ushered me into his magnificent office. The walls were lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with thick legal tomes, and a large mahogany desk dominated the space, a testament to a long and successful career. He sat me down in a soft leather chair that sighed as I sank into it and listened intently, his kind face growing darker with every word I spoke. The whole sordid story poured out of me. I told him everything: the fake concern, the retirement home brochures, the sudden appearance with the suitcases, the forged document Mark had shown me. I told him the cruel words Jessica had said, words that felt like acid on my tongue. I told him about the $200, the Crossroads Motel, and the unbearable pain of discovering my grandchildren's numbers were blocked. As I spoke, Arthur's kindly expression transformed. His face flushed with a deep, righteous anger that mirrored my own. He didn't interrupt. He just let me talk, his jaw tightening and his knuckles turning white as he gripped the arms of his chair. When I finally finished, the room was silent except for the sound of my own ragged breathing and the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. "That monster," he whispered. his voice shaking with a fury I had never heard from him before. That greedy, heartless, conniving monster. He stood up and went to a large, imposing filing cabinet. His movements were swift, energized, and urgent. He pulled out a thick file folder with Vance Richard J. printed on the tab in bold, black letters. "Eleanor," he said, placing the folder on the desk with a solid, satisfying thud. "What your daughter has done is not just immoral. It is highly illegal. This isn't a family squabble. This is a criminal conspiracy. It's called elder abuse, fraud, and forgery. She has committed multiple felonies, and so has her husband." He opened the file and pulled out a heavy document, bound in a crisp blue legal cover. It felt solid and real in a way the flimsy papers Mark had shown me did not. I recognized Richard's neat, strong signature at the bottom, witnessed and notarized. "This," he said, his voice ringing with absolute authority, "is your husband's last will and testament. The real one. Jessica was here for the reading, but you were not. She claimed you were too distraught to attend, and that she would handle everything for you. The lying started from the very beginning." My stomach dropped. She had deliberately, methodically, and maliciously excluded me from the process. She had planned this all along. Arthur cleared his throat, put on his reading glasses, and began to read. "I, Richard James Vance, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath to my beloved wife, Eleanor Marie Vance, the following." He paused and looked at me over the top of his glasses, a small smile playing on his lips. "Our primary residence at 124, Willow Lane, Maple Creek, Ohio, including all furnishings and personal effects therein." Tears welled in my eyes, but this time they were tears of relief. The house was mine. It had always been mine. He continued. "Additionally, I leave her 70% of all my financial assets, investments, and accounts." He looked up from the page and met my gaze, his eyes wide. "Eleanor, at the time of his death, that portion of the estate was valued at approximately $23 million. The room started to spin. $23 million. The numbers were so vast, so unreal they didn't seem to belong to me. All I could think about was the grimy motel room, and the rapidly dwindling $200 in my purse. You might think this is where the story ends. This is where I get my money and my house back. Oh honey, we're just getting started. The best part is yet to come. Because Richard, my brilliant, forward-thinking husband, had anticipated his daughter's greed. He had laid a beautiful, intricate trap. And Jessica had walked right into it with her eyes wide open. Arthur's face grew serious as he continued reading. "To my daughter Jessica Vance Hayes," he read, "I leave $10 million, to be held in a trust, contingent upon one very, very important condition. And that condition was the key to everything." I held my breath, leaning forward in my chair so far I was nearly perched on the edge. Every muscle in my body was tense, coiled like a spring. What was the condition? What final brilliant move had my husband made from beyond the grave to protect me? My mind raced with possibilities, but none of them were as perfect, as elegantly precise, as what Arthur was about to read. Arthur took a slow, deliberate breath, drawing out the moment. His eyes twinkled with what I can only describe as sheer, unadulterated delight. He was enjoying this, and frankly so was I. He read the next sentence, his voice resonating with the full weight and authority of Richard's words. "This trust shall only be dispersed to my daughter Jessica Vance Hayes," he read, enunciating each word carefully, "contingent upon her demonstrating proper care, dignity, and respect for her mother Eleanor Vance in the months following my passing. She is to ensure her mother's comfort, security, and emotional well-being above all else. Should she fail to meet this condition, in the sole and absolute judgment of my executor, Arthur Croft." He paused for dramatic effect, letting the words hang in the air like a guillotine poised to fall. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a wild drumbeat of anticipation. "The entire $10 million trust and all its contents shall be immediately dissolved and bequeathed in full to my wife Eleanor Vance, to do with as she pleases." I stared at him, my mouth hanging open. A sound escaped my lips, half a laugh, half a sob. The sheer, beautiful, poetic justice of it was overwhelming. Richard had known. Somehow, in his quiet, observant way, he had seen the darkness growing in our daughter's heart, a darkness that I, her own mother, had lovingly, foolishly refused to see. He had built a fortress around me with his love and his foresight. And Jessica, in her blind, arrogant greed, had not only failed to breach the walls, she had just handed me the keys to her own treasure chest. Arthur leaned back in his chair, a wide, triumphant grin spreading across his face. He looked like a man who had just won the biggest case of his life. "Eleanor," he said, his voice filled with a profound admiration for his old friend, "your daughter didn't just lie to you. She didn't just commit fraud. She just played herself out of $10 million and handed it directly to you on a silver platter." The numbers were staggering, almost comical in their magnitude. 23 million, which was already mine, plus the 10 million Jessica had just forfeited. $33 million. The exact amount she had so proudly, so cruelly claimed was hers. And the house. It was all mine. Every last cent, every last shingle on the roof, every last blade of grass in the yard. The shock began to wear off, replaced by a surge of power I hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. For my entire life, I had been the quiet one, the peacemaker, the supportive wife, the accommodating mother. I had smoothed over family arguments and kept the peace, often at the expense of my own feelings. That woman was gone. She had been evicted from her own life and left to die in a cheap motel. The woman sitting in this chair now was someone new, someone forged in the fires of betrayal. "What do we do now?" I asked, and my voice was no longer the whisper of a victim. It was the clear, steady tone of a woman in charge. A woman who had just been handed a sword and was ready to use it. Arthur's grin widened. He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over the keypad. "Now, my dear Eleanor, we do two things. First, we call Detective Miller with the Cleveland Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. We have a multi-million-dollar fraud to report." He began to dial. "And then," he added, his eyes sparkling with righteous fire, "we call your daughter's bank. It's time to inform her that we are freezing every single asset she thinks she controls. Every bank account, every credit card, every stock she has transferred into her name is about to be locked down tighter than a drum." My head was spinning with the speed of it all. I thought of Jessica, probably out shopping for new furniture for my house with money she thought was hers. She had no idea that her entire world was about to implode. Arthur picked up the phone. "Now," he said with a grin, "let's call the police. And then let's freeze every single dollar your daughter thinks she has." Arthur Croft's office, once a place of quiet legal counsel, transformed into a bustling command center for what he cheerfully and repeatedly called Operation Payback. He was a man reborn, moving with the energy and predatory glee of a lawyer half his age. He got Detective Miller on the phone, a gruff, no-nonsense cop who sounded like he'd seen and heard it all before. But as Arthur laid out the details, the forged will, the eviction, the stolen millions, and Jessica's final cruel words, even the detective's jaded tone shifted to one of disbelief and disgust. "Kicked her own mother out and told her to go die?" he grumbled over the speakerphone, a sound like gravel turning in a cement mixer. "And she did it for 33 mil? Yeah, that's a new one even for me. Send over the documents. We'll get a warrant issued for her and the husband." While Arthur dealt with the police, his sharp young paralegal was on a separate line, methodically dismantling Jessica and Mark's stolen empire, bank by bank. With the authentic will, a notarized copy of Richard's death certificate, and a power of attorney Arthur quickly drafted for me to sign, we had all the authority we needed. I listened mesmerized as the dominoes began to fall one after another, in a cascade of beautiful righteous justice. Yes, that's correct. This is the office of Arthur Croft, executor of the Vance estate. The legal account holder is Eleanor Vance. Any and all transfers made from that estate account in the last 2 months are to be considered fraudulent. We need an immediate freeze on the account. There was a pause then. "Thank you." Click. He dialed another number. "Good morning. I'm calling about the platinum credit cards issued to Jessica and Mark Hayes, linked to the Vance estate account ending in 4522. Yes, you need to cancel them. Effective immediately. They are stolen." Click. He dialed again. "Hello. I need to speak to your legal department regarding brokerage account number 77B41. Yes, I'll hold." A moment later. "The account is to be locked down immediately. No trades, no transfers, no withdrawals. It is the subject of a major felony fraud investigation." Within 2 hours, the financial fortress Jessica thought she had built around herself had crumbled to dust. Every dollar she had so carefully moved, every asset she had claimed, was now frozen, inaccessible, and flagged for criminal investigation. I pictured her at a high-end boutique, her card being declined with a quiet, humiliating beep. I pictured Mark at a business lunch trying to impress clients, only to have his corporate card rejected. The thought brought a grim, satisfying smile to my face. Arthur hung up his final call and beamed at me, his face flushed with victory. "The trap is set," he said, rubbing his hands together. "Now we wait for the rats to scurry out of their nest." We didn't have to wait long. At exactly 3:47 p.m. my cell phone, which had been heartbreakingly silent for days, buzzed to life. The screen lit up with a name that no longer made my blood run cold, but instead made it sing with anticipation. Jessica. I looked at Arthur, my heart hammering not with fear, but with a hunter's thrill. He simply nodded, his expression calm and encouraging. This was my moment. I took a deep, steadying breath, let it out slowly, and answered the call, putting it on speaker for Arthur and for Detective Miller, who had asked us to call him back in and was now listening in on the line. "Mom? Mom, where are you?" Jessica's voice was high-pitched, thin, and laced with a panic she was failing to conceal. "There's some kind of ridiculous mix-up with the bank accounts. My card was just declined at Nordstrom. They're saying all of Dad's assets are frozen. You need to call them and clear this up right now." I let the silence stretch for a moment, savoring the sound of her frantic breathing. Then I spoke, my voice as calm and cool as the bottom of a well. "Hello, Jessica," I said. The casualness of my tone seemed to unnerve her more than shouting would have. "Funny you should call. I happen to be sitting here in Arthur Croft's office. You remember him, don't you? Your father's attorney? We've been having a fascinating conversation. We're talking about your father's real will." There was a profound, dead silence on the other end of the line. It was so quiet I could hear the faint static of the connection. I could almost hear the gears grinding in Jessica's head as she desperately tried to process what I just said, tried to find an angle, a lie, a way to spin this back in her favor. "Mom, I don't know what you're talking about," she finally stammered, her voice small and weak. "You must be confused. You've been under so much stress. The grief, it can make people imagine things." "Oh, I'm not confused, sweetheart." I cut her off, the venom in my voice surprising even myself. Felt good. It felt powerful. "In fact, I've never seen things more clearly in my entire life. I see that you are a liar, a fraud, and a common thief. I also see that your father was much smarter than you, or I ever gave him credit for." Her voice turned sharp, defensive, the cornered animal lashing out. "I was protecting you. You don't understand complex finances or investment portfolios. I was protecting Dad's legacy from your incompetence." I laughed, a short, bitter, genuine sound that came from deep in my belly. Protecting his legacy? By throwing his 67-year-old widow out of her home with $200 and a death wish? That's a funny way of showing respect, Jessica. I think your father would have a different word for it. I think the police have a different word for it, too. "Someone is taking advantage of you," she shrieked, her voice cracking with the strain of her failing lies. "You're in an emotional state. That crooked lawyer is manipulating you for a bigger fee." The sheer, unmitigated audacity was breathtaking. Even caught red-handed, her immediate instinct was to gaslight me, to make me the crazy, incompetent one. But the old Eleanor, the one who would have doubted herself, was gone. "Jessica," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level that commanded her attention. "Let me clarify the situation for you, since you seem to be the one who is confused. Not only did you never inherit the $33 million, but your actual inheritance, the $10 million your father so generously and perhaps foolishly left you, is now mine as well. It turns out there was a lovely little clause in his will about treating me with dignity and respect. A clause you failed to notice in your haste to get your hands on the money. So thank you, I suppose. Your greed has made me a very wealthy woman." I heard a sharp intake of breath, then a choked guttural sob. That's impossible," she whispered, the words ragged. "Is it?" I countered, pressing my advantage. "Detective Miller of the Cleveland Police Department is sitting right here with me. I'm sure he'd love to discuss the impossibility of felony fraud, forgery, and elder abuse charges with you. The phone went quiet again. The sobs stopped. The calculating mind was working again, searching for a new strategy. Mom, please, she said, her voice changing again, becoming soft and pleading, the little girl voice she used to use to get her way when she was 10. Let's meet. Just you and me. We can talk this out. We can fix this. Oh, we'll be meeting soon enough, dear, I said, the finality of it landing like a hammer blow. At your arraignment. You wouldn't, she gasped, all pretense gone, replaced by raw panic. You wouldn't press charges against your own daughter. Your only family. And in that moment, something cold and hard crystallized in my chest. All the years of love, of sacrifice, of putting her first, it all vanished, replaced by a terrible clear-eyed certainty. Watch me, I said, and I hung up the phone. That evening, as I was sitting in my own kitchen, eating a simple sandwich that tasted like the most delicious meal of my life, Arthur called. The police had arrested Jessica and Mark at a Michelin-starred restaurant downtown. Apparently, they were drowning their sorrows in vintage champagne and lobster, still using a credit card that hadn't been declined yet. The police report, which Arthur read to me with great satisfaction, said Jessica screamed about false arrest and demanded her lawyer. The initial police investigation into their finances quickly revealed that Mark, my respectable banker's son-in-law, was not just a novice criminal. He had deep connections. The forged documents were highly sophisticated, traced back to a specialty printer his firm used for creating fraudulent investment prospectuses. This wasn't just a daughter's greedy impulse. This was a calculated, premeditated crime, planned for months. I spent that night back in my own bed in my own house. The next morning, as the sun streamed through my bedroom window, I received a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Mark's mother, Lillian Hayes. And she wasn't calling to apologize. She was calling to threaten me. Lillian Hayes sounded exactly like I imagined she would. Her voice was smooth and cultured, like aged whiskey, but with an undercurrent of steel that could cut diamonds. She was old money from the East Side, the kind of woman who considered anyone without a multi-generational trust fund to be a lower life form. Eleanor, she began, dispensing with any preamble like hello or how are you. We need to discuss this unfortunate situation rationally, for the good of the family. The family. Her family, she meant. Curiosity and a healthy dose of defiance got the better of me. I wanted to hear what version of reality the Hayes family had constructed to absolve their precious son of his crimes. I agreed to let her come over. A decision that would plunge me into a new, even darker chapter of this nightmare. She arrived in a chauffeured black Mercedes that was longer than my living room, the car gliding to a silent stop at the curb. She was dripping in tasteful, expensive jewelry and wore an expression of pained condescension, as if visiting my lovely middle-class suburban home was a great personal sacrifice she was making for a noble cause. She settled into Richard's armchair as if she were a queen granting an audience, her purse placed perfectly on the ottoman. Mark made some poor choices, obviously, she said, examining her perfectly manicured nails as if they were far more interesting than the conversation at hand. He was led astray by your daughter's emotional instability after her father's death. He's a good boy, but he has a soft heart. But prosecuting him seems rather vindictive, don't you think? I stared at her, my jaw tight. The sheer, unadulterated nerve of this woman. She was throwing my daughter under the bus to save her son. Vindictive? Lillian, your son conspired to forge legal documents, helped steal my entire $33 million inheritance, and personally drove me to a Fleabag motel after I was thrown out of my own house. He is not a good boy. He is a criminal. He was protecting his family, she countered smoothly, not a flicker of shame in her cold blue eyes. He was worried about you, about the children. He has a brilliant career to think of. A reputation in the community. The audacity of it all was making me dizzy. They were all the same, cut from the same cloth of entitlement and delusion, convinced the rules didn't apply to them. So what is it you want, Lillian? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. A small, triumphant smile played on her lips. She thought I was weak, that I was looking for a way out. She thought I could be bought. The Hayes family is prepared to compensate you for your inconvenience, she said, the word inconvenience dripping with dismissal, as if I'd been overcharged for a hotel room. Let's say $5 million. A very generous offer. In exchange, you contact the district attorney and drop all charges against Mark. He walks away, you get your house and a tidy sum to live on, and this whole messy affair disappears. $5 million. A bribe. She wanted me to sell my justice, my dignity, and my husband's memory for $5 million, so her criminal son could get away scot-free. My answer is no, I said flatly. Not for $5 million. Not for $50 million. Lillian's polished facade cracked just for a moment. A flash of pure, reptilian fury darted through her eyes before being suppressed. Be realistic, Eleanor, she hissed, her voice losing its cultured smoothness. You're a 67-year-old woman. What on earth are you going to do with $33 million? You don't know the first thing about how to manage that kind of money. You'll be taken advantage of by the first shark who smiles at you. There it was again. The same condescending belief that I was a helpless, simple-minded woman, incapable of managing my own life. It was the poison that had infected my daughter, and now I saw its source. I think we're done here, Lillian, I said, standing up to signal the end of our meeting. She stood as well, her composure perfectly restored. The smile was back, but it was colder now, sharper like a shard of ice. Very well, she said, walking toward the door. But before I go, you should know that our legal team has been doing some digging of their own. They've found some interesting information about your late husband's business practices. Some very lucrative but highly irregular partnerships. It would be a terrible shame if Richard's pristine reputation were to be tarnished publicly during the trial. The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. What kind of information? I demanded, my voice trembling slightly. She paused at the door and looked back at me, her eyes gleaming with malice. The kind that might make a jury wonder who the real criminal in this family was. After she left, a cold dread washed over me. What if she was right? What didn't I know about the man I was married to for 43 years? I called Arthur immediately. I need to know everything, I told him. And I mean everything. The dread Lillian Hayes had planted in my heart began to grow roots, twisting around my memories of Richard, poisoning everything. What secrets could he have kept from me? Our life had been an open book, or so I had thought. He was an independent business consultant, helping companies streamline their operations. It was a respectable, if somewhat boring, profession. But Lillian's threat hadn't felt like a bluff. It had the cold, hard weight of truth behind it. Arthur, ever the professional, didn't dismiss my fears, though he tried to reassure me. A desperate person makes desperate threats, Eleanor, he said over the phone, his voice a calm anchor in my rising panic. Their case against Mark is airtight. This is just a tactic to scare you. But, he added after a pause, it's always better to know what ammunition your enemy has. We need to get ahead of this. I know just the person. The person was Carol Chan, a forensic accountant and private investigator with a reputation for being a bloodhound when it came to financial crimes. She had sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through you, and a no-nonsense demeanor that was incredibly reassuring. She arrived at my house the next day and turned Richard's study, my study now, into her new headquarters. For 6 long, agonizing hours, I brought her coffee and tried to stay out of her way as she delved into the digital and physical records of my husband's life's work. She photographed documents, downloaded entire hard drives from Richard's computer, and built what she called the real picture of his business empire. The silence in the house was heavy, broken only by the click of her camera, the soft whir of her scanner, and the frantic beating of my own heart. With every hour that passed, my anxiety grew, twisting into a tight, painful knot in my stomach. What would she find? Finally, at dusk, as the setting sun cast long shadows across the room, she called me into the study. The desk was covered in spreadsheets and flow charts that looked like a foreign language to me. A complex web of arrows, boxes, and numbers. Carol's expression was grim, all business. Mrs. Vance, she began, her voice gentle but firm in a way that told me the news was not good. I need you to prepare yourself. What I've found is significant and deeply troubling. I braced myself, my hand on the back of Richard's chair. Its worn leather a familiar but now alien comfort. Your husband was a brilliant man, she said, a note of professional admiration in her voice. A genius at creating complex financial structures. And his consulting firm was incredibly successful. But its primary source of income for many years was not from legitimate business consulting. She took a deep breath, meeting my eyes with a look of profound sympathy. For at least the last 12 years, your husband's firm has been a front for a sophisticated, high-volume money laundering operation. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. The words didn't compute. That's impossible, I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Richard was the most honest man I knew. He gave generously to our church. He sat on the board of the local hospital. He was a good man. I'm sorry, Eleanor, she said, using my first name for the first time, her voice softening. But the evidence is overwhelming and undeniable. She pointed to the charts, tracing the flow of money with her finger. He was washing money for the O'Malley crime syndicate out of Chicago. We're talking about millions upon millions of dollars in illegal transactions, funneled through a network of shell corporations and disguised as legitimate consulting fees. I stared at the papers, at the invoices for services never rendered, at the payments from companies that existed only on paper. It was all there, in Richard's meticulous, familiar handwriting. A secret life hidden in plain sight. My husband, the church deacon, had been business partners with the mob. My entire marriage, my entire life, felt like an elaborate, cruel lie. The beautiful house, the comfortable life, the inheritance my daughter tried to steal. It was all built on a foundation of dirty, blood-soaked money. Carol's face was filled with sympathy, but she wasn't finished. She had one more devastating blow to deliver. There's more, she said softly. The $10 million Richard left for Jessica in the trust. The money you now have? The transaction records are crystal clear. That money came directly from a known laundered account. If the FBI discovers this, they won't just take that $10 million. They will seize everything, the house, the investments, all of it, as proceeds of criminal activity. My entire marriage felt like a lie. The money, the house. It was all tainted. Just then my phone rang. It was a restricted number. A guard from the county jail informed me that Jessica Hayes wanted to speak with me. I accepted the call. Mom, she said, her voice eerily calm and confident. We need to talk. Mark's lawyers found out about Dad, and they're about to make a deal with the FBI. A chill, colder and deeper than any I had ever felt, went down my spine. They knew. Of course they knew. It wasn't a lucky guess or a desperate threat from Lillian. Mark, the savvy investment banker, must have seen the same red flags in Richard's finances that Carol had just spent the day uncovering. They hadn't just stumbled upon this information in the last few days, they had been holding it, waiting. This was their ace in the hole, their trump card, and they were finally playing it. What kind of deal, Jessica? I asked, my voice a low, dangerous whisper that didn't sound like my own. Carol, the investigator, looked at me, her eyes wide with alarm, and gestured frantically for me to keep her on the line, to keep her talking. It's a good deal, Mom, Jessica said, and I could hear the smug, triumphant confidence returning to her voice. She thought she had one. She thought she had me cornered. It's a practical solution for everyone. Mark's lawyers have been in contact with the U.S. Attorney's Office. They're prepared to offer full cooperation and provide the federal government with everything they need to know about Dad's associates from Chicago. I felt sick to my stomach. She was going to sell out her own dead father's memory, brand him a mob associate, all to save her own worthless skin. In exchange for this invaluable cooperation, she continued, her voice sickeningly smooth like a practiced sales pitch, the FBI is willing to grant Mark and me full immunity. All the charges against us, the fraud, the forgery, the elder abuse, they all disappear. We walk away clean. It was a brilliant sociopathic move. They were turning my personal victory, my moment of justice, into their strategic advantage. They were using my husband's secret shame to erase their own. And what about me? I asked, my blood running cold. What happens to me in this practical solution of yours? That's the best part, Mom, she said, her voice dripping with false generosity. We've negotiated for you too. We made sure you were taken care of. You get to keep the house and $5 million free and clear. The rest of the money, well, the government will seize it as criminal assets, but you won't face any charges for unknowingly benefiting from it. See, we all get to walk away from this mess and start over. I was speechless. She was asking me to become her accomplice, to stand by and watch as she and her husband got away with everything. while I was left with a fraction of what was rightfully mine and the knowledge that my husband's legacy would be forever stained. She wanted me to sanction her betrayal. "I'm asking you to be practical, Mom," she said, as if reading my mind. "This is the only way out. For any of us. The alternative is you lose everything anyway, and you could potentially face serious charges yourself for living off illicit funds for years. They're giving us until tomorrow night to accept the deal. Mark's lawyer needs an answer from you by then. Don't be stupid." The line went dead. The call was over. The ultimatum had been delivered. I looked around Richard's study, at the evidence of his double life spread across the desk. The expensive furniture, the rare books, the art on the walls, all of it felt like stolen property. 43 years of marriage to a stranger. A daughter who had inherited not just his money, but his talent for deception and his ruthlessness. I felt trapped, cornered with no way out. For a moment, a dark, weary moment, I considered her offer. Maybe $5 million and the house was better than nothing. Maybe it was time to just end this nightmare and retreat into what was left of my life. If you've stuck with me this far, through all this darkness, please comment the number 1 down below so I know you're still on this journey with me. Your support right now means the world. Because sitting there, in the darkest moment of my life, they thought they had me. They thought the scared, grieving, incompetent widow would take the deal. But they had underestimated me for the last time. I picked up the phone and dialed Carol, the investigator. "Get me a meeting with the FBI," I said, my voice shaking not with fear, but with a white-hot rage. "First thing tomorrow morning. I have a story I think they'll want to hear." The FBI field office in downtown Cleveland was exactly as you'd imagine from the movies. Sterile, intimidating, and buzzing with a quiet, intense energy that made the hairs on my arms stand up. The walls were a bland government-issue beige. The air smelled of strong coffee and ozone from the humming computers, and no one smiled. Arthur Croft sat beside me in the waiting area, his presence a solid, reassuring anchor in the storm of my emotions. He had been on the phone all night, pulling every string he had to get us this meeting on such short notice. We were led into a small windowless conference room with a large table and several uncomfortable-looking chairs. The only decoration was a framed photo of the American flag. The silence was absolute. A moment later, the door opened and a woman walked in. She was tall and lean, dressed in a sharp dark pantsuit, with an air of crisp authority that needed no introduction. "Mrs. Vance," she said, her handshake firm and brief. "I'm Special Agent Martinez. Thank you for coming in on such short notice." She sat across from us, opened a thin file but didn't look at it. Her focus, her intelligent, penetrating gaze, was entirely on me. "Mr. Croft tells me you have some information for us regarding a potential federal crime," she said, her voice neutral, professional, and impossible to read. This was it. My one and only move. My last stand. I had to get ahead of Jessica and Mark. I had to be the one to tell the story, to control the narrative. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure she could see it beating through my blouse. So I did. I took a deep breath and I laid out everything, my voice shaking at first, but growing stronger and steadier with every word. I told her about Richard's death and my profound grief. I told her about Jessica's betrayal, the forged will, the eviction, the Crossroads Motel. I recounted, word for word, Lillian Hayes's visit and her thinly veiled threats. And then, my voice dropping, I told her about what Carol had discovered. The money laundering, the shell corporations, the damning connection to the O'Malley crime syndicate in Chicago. I slid the entire file Carol had prepared across the table, a detailed, damning map of my late husband's secret criminal empire. Finally, I told her about Jessica's phone call from jail, the ultimatum, the deal they were trying to force on me. They believe they can trade information about my husband's crimes for immunity from their own. I finished, my voice trembling slightly from the sheer emotional exhaustion of it all. And they think I'll cooperate because I'm terrified of losing everything and going to jail myself. Agent Martinez listened to my entire story without a single interruption, her expression remaining completely unreadable. When I was done, a long, heavy silence filled the room. My mind raced. Had I just implicated myself beyond repair? Had I made a terrible, irreversible mistake by coming here? Then, for the first time, Agent Martinez smiled. It was a small, knowing, almost imperceptible smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, but it was there. "Are you afraid, Mrs. Vance?" she asked softly. I thought about the question for a moment, truly considered it. Agent Martinez, I said, my voice finding a strength I didn't know it possessed. 3 weeks ago, I was a grieving widow sleeping in a budget motel, convinced my life was over. Today, I'm sitting in an FBI office, voluntarily confessing that my dead husband may have been a high-level mob associate. Fear is no longer my primary emotion. What is? She asked, her curiosity seeming genuine. Anger, I said, the word tasting clean and sharp in my mouth. Pure, crystallized anger. At being underestimated. At being manipulated. At being treated like I was stupid and disposable by the very people who should have protected me. Her smile widened, and this time it did reach her eyes. I see. She finally looked down at the file I had given her, then pushed it aside as if it were of little importance. She opened the file she had brought with her. It was thick, filled with documents, surveillance photographs, and transcripts. Mrs. Vance, she said, leaning forward, her voice dropping into a confidential tone. We appreciate your candor. And we appreciate the information you've provided. It confirms much of what we already know. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. But there's a piece of this puzzle you're missing. A very important piece that changes everything. My brow furrowed. What could I possibly be missing? Your husband, Richard Vance, she said, her voice dropping slightly. He wasn't running a money laundering operation for the O'Malley Syndicate. She paused again, locking her eyes with mine, letting the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. He was our inside man. Richard Vance was a confidential federal informant for the last 12 years of his life. The world tilted on its axis and then snapped back into place, but everything looked different. The words hung in the air of that sterile conference room, completely rearranging the last decade of my life, my marriage, my entire reality. Informant? My Richard? The quiet, predictable man who read the paper every morning and fell asleep in his armchair watching the news? Agent Martinez saw the profound, uncomprehending disbelief on my face and slid a document across the table. It was an official immunity and cooperation agreement between the U.S. Department of Justice and Richard J. Vance, dated 12 years ago. His familiar, strong signature was at the bottom, a signature I had seen on thousands of birthday cards and household checks, but never on anything like this. It was one of the most successful and longest-running deep-cover operations this office has ever run, she explained, her voice now filled with a deep professional respect that made my heart swell with a strange new kind of pride. Richard was a hero, Mrs. Vance. A true patriot. The financial information he provided over the years was instrumental. It led directly to 47 arrests and the seizure of over $200 million in criminal assets. He was helping us build a massive RICO case against the O'Malley Syndicate and 2 other affiliated crime families. But the money? I stammered, my mind struggling to catch up. Carol, the investigator, she said it was all dirty. She traced it. The money was very real, Agent Martinez confirmed. And your investigator is very good. As part of his agreement, and to maintain his cover as a high-level financial operative for them, the Bureau authorized him to keep a percentage of the funds he laundered. It was his payment for the incredible risks he took every single day of his life for 12 years. He lived in constant danger. Mrs. Vance, the $33 million in your husband's estate is not the proceeds of crime. It is the legitimate, federally sanctioned payment for his heroic cooperation. It is legally 100% yours. I put my head in my hands, and a wave of emotion so profound it felt like a physical force washed over me. It was grief and relief and awe and pride all mingled together. Tears streamed down my face, not of sadness for the man I'd lost, but of awe for the man I now realized I never fully knew. He hadn't been a criminal living a double life. He had been a secret warrior, a silent guardian, fighting a battle I never knew existed. And he had done it all to protect me, to provide for our future. The meticulous will, the brilliant, elegant trap he set for Jessica. It all made perfect, heartbreaking sense now. He knew the world he was in was dangerous, and he had done everything in his power to ensure I would be safe from it all. Why didn't anyone tell me? I whispered, my voice thick with tears. The investigation was and still is highly sensitive and ongoing, she said gently. We couldn't risk exposure, not to anyone. And frankly, until your daughter and son-in-law made their illegal move, We weren't certain if you were aware of Richard's activities or potentially involved. Their fraud scheme, ironically, was the best proof we could have ever asked for of your complete innocence. The irony was staggering, almost poetic. Jessica and Mark were planning to blackmail me with information that would have not only exonerated my husband, but would have solidified my legal claim to the very fortune they so desperately craved. They had no idea their trump card was a dud. Agent Martinez leaned forward, her expression shifting from professional to strategic. The hunter's instinct was back in her eyes. Your daughter and son-in-law are about to commit a very serious federal crime, she said, her voice sharp. Attempted extortion of a federal witness, which, as the unknowing spouse of our informant, you now are. They are scheduled to be released on bail later today to negotiate the terms of their deal with you. Mrs. Vance, how would you feel about helping us catch them in the act? A fierce, protective fire ignited in my chest. For Richard's memory. For my own dignity. For the justice they had tried to mock and subvert. What do you need me to do? I asked, my voice clear and steady. That evening I sat in my living room, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. Taped to my chest beneath my blouse was a small, powerful recording device. It felt like a secret shield. The FBI was parked in an unmarked van down the street, listening to every word, recording every lie. Jessica and Mark thought they were coming to a surrender meeting where they held all the power. They had no idea they were walking into the final act of their own destruction. As Jessica and Mark walked into my living room, confident they had won, they had no idea the FBI was listening to every word. And I was about to give them the performance of a lifetime. They walked into my living room like conquering heroes returning from a victorious campaign. Mark carried a sleek leather briefcase, which he placed on my coffee table with an air of finality. Jessica had a smirk on her face, a look of smug satisfaction that I suddenly wanted to slap right off. She even had the audacity to lean in and try to kiss my cheek, a gesture so false it was almost comical. I turned my head slightly so her lips met the air. Mom, she said, her voice oozing a fake, syrupy concern that turned my stomach. I'm so glad you decided to be reasonable. This is for the best, for everyone. Let's just get this over with, Jessica, I said, my voice intentionally weary and defeated. I sank into my armchair, making myself look small and broken. I gestured for them to sit on the sofa. The same sofa Richard and I had picked out together at a furniture store years ago, arguing playfully over fabric swatches. The memory felt like a knife twisting in my heart. Mark, all business, opened his briefcase with a flourish, pulling out a thick stack of papers. All right, Eleanor, he said, his tone condescendingly professional. As we discussed, this agreement is very favorable for you. You retain the house, $5 million in clean assets, and you receive full immunity from any potential prosecution. All you have to do is sign here, and we instruct our lawyers to begin their cooperation with the FBI regarding Richard's extracurricular activities. I looked at the papers, then back at them. The small, cool weight of the wire on my chest was a constant reminder that I was not alone. That justice was listening. So you knew, I said softly, playing the part of the confused old woman. All this time, you knew my husband was involved in something criminal? Jessica and Mark exchanged a quick, nervous glance. It was clear they had rehearsed their story. We suspected, Mark said carefully, choosing his words. The numbers in the estate portfolio didn't add up to a simple consulting business. We discovered the full truth while trying to secure the estate and protect it. We are doing this to protect the family legacy, Eleanor. To clean up the mess Richard left behind. By collaborating with the FBI to destroy my husband's reputation, in exchange for getting away with felony fraud? I asked, letting a little more steel into my voice. I watched them closely. They didn't even flinch at the word fraud. It's the only way, Jessica insisted, her patience wearing thin. She saw my hesitation as weakness. Look, do you want the money or not? Do you want to go to jail or not? It's a simple choice. Sign the papers and this is all over. This was my moment. The one Agent Martinez had prepped me for. The question that would seal their fate. I just have one more question, I said, looking Mark directly in the eye, holding his gaze. This whole plan, discovering the laundered money, using it to blackmail me into this deal to save yourselves, was this your idea? Did you mastermind this? Mark puffed out his chest slightly, a flicker of arrogant pride in his eyes. He couldn't resist taking credit. I structure complex deals for a living, Eleanor, he boasted. When I see a problem, I find a solution. I found a path that provides the best possible outcome for everyone involved. So you are admitting, I said, my voice slow and deliberate, each word a hammer blow, that you are attempting to extort me, using information about my husband's secret life to coerce me into helping you evade prosecution for your own documented crimes? The color drained from Mark's face as he finally understood the legal trap I had just laid. Jessica shot to her feet, her eyes wide with confusion and sudden fear. What did you just say? What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that my husband wasn't a criminal, I said, standing up to face them, feeling 10 feet tall. He was a federal informant. And you, I said, pointing a trembling finger at them, just admitted on a federal wire to attempting to extort a federal witness. As if on cue, the front door burst open. Agent Martinez and 2 other agents, clad in tactical vests, stormed into the living room. FBI. Don't move. Jessica let out a piercing scream. Mark looked like he was going to be sick, his face a pale, sweaty green. His briefcase tumbled to the floor, spilling the useless immunity agreements all over my rug. Jessica Hayes, Mark Hayes, Agent Martinez announced, her voice booming in the suddenly silent room as she recited their rights. You are under arrest for conspiracy, wire fraud, and attempted extortion of a federal witness. As a female agent cuffed my daughter, she turned to me, her face a twisted mask of rage and utter, uncomprehending betrayal. How could you? She shrieked, tears of fury streaming down her face. How could you do this to your own family? I looked her dead in the eye, all the pain and love and grief of the past few months hardening into a final unbreakable resolve. The same way you could leave your own mother to die, I said calmly. The only difference is what I did was legal. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed into my newly renovated kitchen. It wasn't just renovated, it was reborn just like me. The dark, heavy cabinets Richard had loved were gone, replaced by bright, airy white ones I'd chosen myself. The countertops were a sparkling quartz that caught the light, and the whole room felt open, clean, and full of promise. The scent of fresh coffee and sawdust from the ongoing work in the house was the smell of my new beginning. Jessica and Mark were both serving sentences in a federal prison. Their trial was a brief, brutal, and humiliating affair. The crystal-clear recording I made was the prosecution's star exhibit. They were convicted on all charges, and due to the extortion of a federal witness charge, their sentences were significantly longer than what they would have received for the initial fraud. Their story was splashed across the Cleveland News and even some national outlets as a shocking cautionary tale of greed, entitlement, and the consequences of underestimating a 67-year-old widow. I took a sip of my coffee and looked out the new bay window at the garden I was now planting. My life had a new purpose, one that had risen from the ashes of betrayal and grief. Using $15 million of Richard's, and my hard-earned money, I had worked with Arthur Croft to establish the Vance Foundation for Elder Dignity. We provided pro bono legal services, financial counseling, and temporary housing for seniors who were victims of financial abuse, often at the hands of their own families. I had found a new calling, honoring Richard's legacy as a secret warrior by becoming a public one. His quiet courage had inspired my own loud defiance. My story, it turned out, had captured the public's imagination. A producer from Netflix had called a few months ago, and they were now in pre-production on a limited documentary series about my ordeal, tentatively titled, Just the Wife. All of the proceeds, of course, would go directly to the foundation. My phone buzzed with an email from my new financial advisor, a sharp young woman who never once spoke down to me. It was a forward from Jessica's lawyer. She had written again from prison. Another long, rambling letter filled with apologies that sounded more like excuses and pleas for forgiveness that felt more like demands. I had read the first few, searching for a glimmer of true remorse, but found only self-pity. I instructed my lawyer to return this one unopened, just as I had the last one. Some wounds are too deep to be healed by words alone. Forgiveness, I had learned, needed to be earned through action and change, not through hollow self-serving letters. Later that day, I was in my new art studio, what used to be Richard's dark wood-paneled study. The heavy desk was gone, replaced by an easel. The law books were gone, replaced by shelves of vibrant paints and clean canvases. The room was now a space filled with light, creativity, and possibility. I had rediscovered a passion for oil painting, something I'd abandoned 40 years ago to be a good wife and mother. On the easel was my latest work, a self-portrait. The woman in the painting was different. She wasn't the grieving, lost, invisible widow I had been 6 months ago. Her eyes were clear and focused, her expression was serene but strong, and there were laugh lines around her mouth that hadn't been there before. She looked powerful, unafraid. She looked like she was finally home. I learned that the best revenge isn't getting even. It's becoming everything your enemies and even you yourself never thought you could be. My daughter told me I was worthless, a useless old woman who should find a place to die. Instead, I found a reason to live, a purpose bigger than myself, and a strength I never knew I possessed. I learned that true family aren't just the people who share your blood. They are the people who lift you up when you are at your most vulnerable, not the ones who try to bury you for their own profit. Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but it's important. If you or someone you love has ever faced a situation where your trust was broken by family, please share your experience in the comments below. You are not alone. Your story matters, and your voice deserves to be heard. And please don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories of resilience, justice, and the incredible strength of the human spirit.